There was a loud knock on the door, and my 8-year-old, half-lab, half-mutt Macy started barking. I answered the door to a man in a police officer's uniform. "What is it tonight, Frank?" I said. "It's Officer Thomas to you," he said as he lowered his hand towards his gun. "You better shut that dog up before I do it for you." "You know she's tame and won't bite anyone," I said as I reached for her collar and put her in the bedroom. "Sorry, Officer Thomas," I said. "I didn't know you were on duty." "Quit being a smartass," he said. "Being a police officer is a 24/7 job. I'm always on duty, unlike you and your crappy office job where you work a few hours and are off every weekend." 24/7? You must get some killer overtime then, right? I said. "You know what I meant," said Frank. "What did I do this time, Frank?" I said. "Are you going to try and write me a ticket for illegally parking in my own driveway again? The judge loved that one." "You mowed your lawn when you knew I would be sleeping," he said. "You think it is funny I have to be protecting your sorry ass on hardly any sleep. I'm not going to warn you again." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "You are really here because I mowed my yard at 9 a.m. before it got too hot outside?" "Why don't you just move already?" he said, with a smug look on his face. "Move?" I said. "I've been living here longer than you. This was my grandparents' house, who left it to me. You are the one who should move. Everything was perfect until you moved into the neighborhood." "You need to move because I don't like living next to you," he said as he walked away. "You need to check with me before you mow your lawn. I need my sleep since I'm a police officer." I slammed the door shut and lifted my middle finger into the air. Goddamn asshole. Then I went and let Macy out of the bedroom. 4 years of this nonsense. 4 long years. When he first moved in, I thought having a police officer next door would be a great thing. It might make the neighborhood safer since he would park his police car outside every night. And I used to think that someone who put their life on the line every day to protect people from the bad guys would be a respectful person and someone I would love to have as my neighbor. I could not have been more wrong. He thinks he runs the entire neighborhood. I have never met someone who is a bigger asshole than he is. He thinks that just because he is a police officer, that he has authority over everyone at any time. Even worse is, he isn't completely wrong. If you get on the wrong side of a police officer like him in this small town, he can and will make your life a living hell. It started as soon as he moved in. First, it was my dog crap in his yard one time. I even bagged it up when it happened, but that wasn't enough. Eventually, I had to build an 8-foot high-privacy fence to keep Macy from accidentally crossing his property line. I didn't have the money, but if it would shut him up about having my dog sent to the pound and put to sleep, it was worth it. That dog is my best friend. Then, he complained that she barked too much when she was outside, and he couldn't sleep. Macy is your typical dog. She isn't a puppy, and only barks when someone knocks or the UPS truck goes by. She is not a loud dog, and only goes out a few minutes at a time as she's an indoor dog. It's not just my dog, but he always finds something to be an asshole over. My car is too old, my yard needs to be mowed, but only when he allows it. I hate him. He hates me. I know he hates me. The only thing he hates more than me is the crows. And that is exactly why I feed the crows every single day. After he left, I let Macy out of the bedroom and went to the backyard to feed the crows. Feeding them always made me feel a little better when he would tick me off. Frank hates crows. He loved to garden before he moved here, but can't because the crows always eat everything he plants. He has tried everything to get rid of them, like a scarecrow, putting out poison, even trying to shoot them. But nothing works. What started as a petty act of revenge to get the crows to stay in our neighborhood to tick him off has actually turned into something I enjoy. After a while, you start to recognize individual crows. They all look like the same at first, but eventually, you see some physical differences as well as some personalities. It is said that crows are some of the most intelligent birds in existence, and they never forget a person's face. After a few years of feeding them, I believe it. Crows are some of the most amazing animals in the world. It is just pure luck Frank also hates them. My favourite bird is one I named Franklin. I named him that because no matter how big of an asshole Frank is, having my favourite crow named Franklin is just my way to make sure the name Frank is associated with something good. It is dumb and passive-aggressive as hell, but it is little victories like this that help me not let Frank beat me. Franklin sits on a telephone pole outside my yard every day. Morning and night he sits and watches. When I put the food out, he is always the first to eat. The other crows yield to him, at least when it comes to my yard. Sometimes he even brings me body parts of animals he's killed. At first it was weird, but I realized it was a gift. Kinda like I feed him my food, so he's sharing his food with me. It is pretty cool in a morbid type of way. He is my crow. She's dead. Macy is dead. That asshole killed her. He killed my best friend. I could tell something was wrong with her and got her to the emergency vet as fast as I could, but I wasn't fast enough. The vet did everything he could, but she was poisoned. The vet suspects she was given antifreeze. Apparently it tastes sweet and dogs will drink it. I don't know how he did it, but there was no doubt it was him. He has gone too far this time. I have got to do something. I went over to his house and banged on his door. He answered the door with a smirk on his face. "What do you want?" he asked. "You killed her. You bloody killed her," I said. "I know damn well it was you." "I haven't killed anybody," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You killed my dog," I said. "What proof do you have?" he smirked. "And what are you going to do about it?" I didn't say a word. I just stared daggers into his eyes. It took everything I had not to punch him in his face. I would have done it too, if he wasn't jacked up on steroids, and would have loved, more than anything, for me to give him an excuse to beat the crap out of me, and then put me in jail after. "You should go down to the station and fill out a police report. Since you are my neighbour, I will look into this one myself. I'll give you the special treatment you deserve." He laughed before shutting the door in my face. Goddamn asshole. There was nothing else to do except to go home. He won again. He always wins. I always thought once I grew up the bullying would stop. The bullies would eventually move on and become adults and get over whatever inferiority complex they had. But I was wrong. Some bullies grow up to become asshole cops and use their position to continue to bully others around they don't like. I grabbed a beer out of the fridge and went outside to feed the crows. I wouldn't be lying if I said I didn't cry. I broke down. She was my best friend and didn't deserve to die that way. I was alone without her. She was all I had that I truly cared about. I looked up from my seat, and on the other side of the porch, perched on a chair, was my crow, Franklin. He had never came this close before. He didn't move. He just sat and watched me. It was like he knew what happened unnoticed, Macy was gone and came to comfort me. And he sat, perched on the chair, watching me. I waited for him to leave, but he didn't. He just stayed. He killed her, Franklin. He did it. I know it with all my heart. He is the one who would do something like that. I even thought about putting up security cameras, but didn't. Maybe she would still be alive if I had. I poured my heart out to the crow. He didn't move. He didn't make a noise. He just sat there like he was listening to me. Somehow, I needed this. He won, Franklin. I have to move. I can't live next to the asshole who murdered my best friend. I'm sorry. I'm gonna miss you, buddy. I wish someone would kill that asshole for what he did. He deserves it for what he did to us. Franklin cried out aloud, "Cry! Cry!" Then flew back to his post. I finished my beer and decided to go in for the night. The next morning, I slept in late. I didn't really want to get out of bed and face the day at all without Macy by my side, but I forced myself out of bed anyways. I went to brew a pot of coffee and glanced out the window where I could see that asshole, Franklin, outside in his backyard, tending to his crappy garden. He was clearly ticked off and cursing at the crows who had destroyed his garden again. It gave me a little smile and a much-needed laugh to know my crows had taken something away from him. I poured my cup of coffee and went and sat outside on my patio. I looked up and Franklin was in his spot. I glanced around the sky and saw crow after crow sitting on the telephone lines, and then even more crows flying in the sky above. I've never seen so many crows before in my life. Never this many in my backyard area. It was like every crow in our state had congregated outside my backyard. Frank must have seen the same thing, because he was still in his backyard, yelling at the crows. I looked back at Franklin, who was still staring at me. He gave a loud cry and flew off his spot towards Frank's yard. The other crows near him followed after. I heard Frank scream, "Ah, goddamn birds! Ow, what the hell?" I looked back, and more crows were now flying down into his backyard, making loud screeching sounds. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could hear his screams. The sky was filled with crows swooping down, attacking Frank. It looked like a sea of black as the sky was filled with more crows. Where did all these crows come from? On and on, the waves of crows would go into Frank's yard and then fly off before the next round would go down. The privacy fence was too high for me to see the carnage on the other side, but his screams were bad enough. Finally, the screaming stopped. Almost as soon as it had started, the sky turned back from black to blue. The only sound I could hear was Frank's wife crying and begging for help. I went around and took a look over Frank's backyard and saw what was left of him. His body had been pecked apart from head to toe. It no longer looked like a person as much as a bloody piece of roadkill. His face was completely pecked and eaten off. His body had been eaten down to the bones in some places. It had only taken a few minutes, but the crows had made short work of him. The sight would have made me sick if it was anyone but Frank. The ambulance and seemingly half the police department had showed up soon after. He was one of their own, but nothing could be done. He was dead. I went back home and grabbed a beer. I went out to my porch and sat down to enjoy this moment. A few minutes later, my crow friend, Franklin, flew up carrying something in his mouth. He landed on the table in front of me and dropped Frank's bloody eyeball. He nudged it towards me, as he wanted me to have it as a gift. He looked at me and gave one loud "Cry!" and I returned a smile. He flew back to his spot and stood proud, watching. This must be why they call a large group of crows a murder.